Welcome to the Panic Attack Recovery Podcast, an ongoing source of practical strategies and tips for anxiety and ADHD. We're a collaboration of former sufferers helping those currently struggling with anxiety, panic attacks, and ADHD so they can express their true competencies in life. Now, here is Matthew, your host.
Hi, it's Matthew from PanicAttackRecovery.com. Thank you for joining me for another podcast. Today I want to talk about snap judgments. And when I talk about snap judgments, what I'm referring to is the tendency to quickly judge a situation or a person. Moreover, while this tendency can have its uses, it can also be detrimental to social relationships and to your life in a number of ways. Now, we've talked about in previous podcasts and videos judgment, but we haven't really talked about snap judgments. And moreover, what I'm really wanting to convey is a trick that you can use to overcome this problem. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're in a situation with a number of people and you have some friends with you, you have maybe some colleagues with you, and you're introduced to some people in the group you haven't met before. And let's say that something about them rubbed you the wrong way. You might have already formed a judgment. But often when we're forming judgments, we may not be in the best place to form them at that time. So the tip really is also contained in the challenge, in that sometimes it's best to withhold judgment, reserve judgment until later. Here's what I mean. Going back to that situation where you're around friends and maybe colleagues and you're introduced to some people, someone new to you, and you've made a judgment about them. But later you start thinking about it and you think, that person maybe seemed rude, but maybe they were rushed, maybe they had a lot on their mind. Maybe they thought the same thing of me. Maybe they're just reserved. Rather than judging them in terms of perhaps their rudeness, it may be that they're rude, first of all. So I'm not saying that they're never rude. I'm simply saying that allowing yourself to think about it later, you might actually be a bit fairer in your judgment and not be as quick to judge. You might say to yourself, they seemed a little off, but maybe they were having a bad day. And of course, this is common sense. But we often lose common sense when it comes to social relationships. We form quick judgments. But we also do this for circumstances. So let's say that you're in a new situation. It may be you've started a new job, or you've started working with someone new in your organization. And again, you're not really sure about the person's competency perhaps at first. Maybe they've made a few questionable calls, or they've done some things that you wouldn't have done, and you're rushing to judge them, or maybe their competence. Or maybe they've suggested some new ideas, and at first you resist those ideas and think, who are they to suggest these new ideas? They've just started in the organization. Now, these are pretty extreme examples, but I think the best thing to do is to think about your own life and how maybe you rush to make snap judgments of situations, people, circumstances. And whether it's meeting someone for the first time, or it's working with someone for the first time, or a new idea is presented by someone, or maybe even you think of a new idea yourself. Sometimes you might still resist a new idea that you think of and think, that can't work. Now, I just want to clarify something, because I think it's important to clarify that I'm not suggesting that every interaction is so complicated that you have to reserve judgment and think about things later, or every situation you encounter you have to wait until later to make judgments. No. In many positions, in many areas of our life, we may have to make judgments fairly quickly. I'm not saying not to do that, but I'm saying often for the social situations, or when you're thinking of a new idea, or someone is presenting new ideas to you, sometimes it's best to reserve judgment, because we often are almost programmed in a way to say no to new things, new ideas, anything that's sort of new outside of us. Sometimes, not all of us, but many of us can be resistant to new ideas or situations, or different ways of operating, so to speak. So by taking time, learning to take time to reserve judgment until later allows you to consider it again. And sometimes you'll often consider the situation again and say, you know what, that is a bad idea, or I just don't see that working. Or perhaps this person isn't working out well. Maybe there are some concerns. Maybe I can provide that person with some feedback. So it's not about denial. It's just about considering more fully a situation or a person rather than in the snap judgment. So if you've listened to our other podcasts and videos, you know that we always like to provide homework. Rather than just giving a tip or a suggestion, we like to say, take some time to reflect on the idea that we've presented and think about it in terms of your own life, in terms of circumstances, social situations, other scenarios you find yourself in. Do you make snap judgments? And are they sometimes wrong? And if so, could you build in some time in your day to reserve judgment and to consider things again more fully later when you're in a different situation? Sometimes, you see, as anxiety and ADHD sufferers, we can be highly stressed and we may be in a bad mood, quite frankly. And we are more hypersensitive, hypervigilant to things that offend us. I'm using air quotes again, in other people's behaviors, in ideas they present. So we're quick to judge in that situation. And then even if we just sort of cool our jets, so to speak, later, when we're more calm and we think about the person, the idea, what have you, we are more fair anyway. So it can be twofold. It can be even the mood we're in. We may be hypervigilant and almost finding things to be offended about without those things even happening. We're already kind of looking for those things. So it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But secondly, we can also make snap judgments because we don't have all information at that point in time. We may have just seen a snippet of someone's behavior or a snippet of an idea may have been considered, but we may not have fully considered the idea or the person's judgment. So the suggestion from this podcast is to think about your own life, think about situations and people. Do you form snap judgments? Think back of situations where you have. If you form judgments and you can isolate some situations, think about whether or not you were perhaps in a bad mood at the time. You were anxious, you were hypervigilant, and almost looking for things to be offended about. Not consciously, but at some level, you were more sensitive to those things. And then think about the situation more fully and consider information. And I think that you will feel more confident in the decision that you make. Again, we're not saying that snap judgments are always wrong, but they can be, and they can be based on a small amount of information.
Thank you for listening to the Panic Attack Recovery Podcast. Make sure that you have subscribed to our podcast and please comment and rate us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All show notes and links are accessible from our website. Please visit our site and subscribe to our free newsletter at panicattackrecovery.com. All information has been provided for educational purposes. Please consult a healthcare professional about any disorder or condition and the applicability of any information provided in this podcast.